There comes a moment in life when nothing feels broken on the outside yet everything is shattered within. You wake up, do what you've always done, speak as you've always spoken, and yet, beneath it all, a silent question throbs in your chest like a wound you can't locate. Only there is no question, just silence. Wait, emptiness. This is not sadness, not anxiety, not fatigue, this is despair. And contrary to what the world may say, despair is not a malfunction. It is not a weakness. It is not something to numb, silence, or flee from. It is a signal. It is the soul knocking from the inside, demanding to be heard. Søren Kierkegaard called despair the sickness unto death, not because it kills the body, but because it quietly starves the self. It eats the soul by inches, not in pain, but in pretense, in illusion, in forgetfulness of who we are. Despair is the absence of self, the haunting sense that you are not living your life, only playing a role in someone else's script. And the tragedy is not in feeling despair. The tragedy is in not feeling it soon enough. Most people never encounter despair. Not truly. They stay busy enough, distracted enough, praised enough, productive enough. They spend their lives just above the waterline, never diving down, never asking why the current keeps pulling them under. But if you are one of the few who have felt it, that hollow, echoing ache, you are not cursed. You are on the edge of something sacred, because despair is not the end, it is the beginning. It is not darkness closing in. It is the light outside forcing its way through the cracks of your false identity. And so, this is not a lecture, not a motivational speech. It is a slow uncovering, a peeling back of illusions, an invitation to confront the shadow, sit in the silence, and walk through the fire that, paradoxically, saves you. Because the only way out is in. Despair doesn't arrive out of nowhere. It creeps in quietly, like fog through a window left ajar. It settles not into the life you pretend to live, but into the space between who you are and who you've convinced the world you are. What Kierkegaard understood, and what modern psychology confirms, is that the self splits. There is the self we perform, and there is the self we bury. Despair emerges not when something goes wrong in life, but when the gap between those two selves grows too wide to ignore. The truth is, we all wear masks. Some shine, some protect, some seduce, but all of them, in the end, suffocate, and the longer we wear them, the less we remember the face beneath. Carl Jung named the thing we bury the shadow, all those thoughts, traits, impulses we were taught to hide, the anger that made us unlovable, the creativity that made us odd, the grief that made us inconvenient. We pushed it all down. We became what we thought would be accepted, but nothing buried ever dies. It waits, and despair is the moment the shadow knocks. It knocks through a panic attack in the middle of an ordinary day. It knocks when the promotion you chased for 10 years brings you nothing but nausea. It knocks when you race surrounded by people and feel completely alone. Despair is not an intruder, it is the returning king, the self you locked away, the soul you silenced, and now, it demands a reckoning. There is a story, it doesn't matter if it is true, about a man who spent decades building a perfect life. He rose in business, had the house, the family, the prestige. He never stopped moving, because silence made him uneasy. He never sat still, because stillness whispered too loudly. Then one day, he broke. Nothing happened, no death, no failure, no catastrophe, just a moment, a quiet afternoon, a glance in the mirror, and suddenly, he couldn't breathe. That was not weakness, that was honesty, because when despair hits, it doesn't ask permission. It doesn't explain itself, it just tears the veil. And in its rawness, in its unbearable intensity, it speaks, this life, it is not yours. You are wearing someone else's name. The shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to be seen, and the moment you turn toward it, not to fight, not to fix, but to witness, everything shifts. You may cry for the first time in years. You may remember a version of yourself that you abandoned. You may feel shame, rage, regret, but you will also feel something else. Presence, depth, aliveness, because despair, when you stop running from it, becomes a guide, a fierce, demanding, sacred guide, one who has no time for your masks, one who will burn down every false thing you've built, not to punish you, but to return you to truth. This is the paradox of despair. It feels like death, but it is birth. The world will tell you to move on, cheer up, stay positive, but the shadow doesn't care about positivity, it cares about wholeness. And wholeness is never light without dark, it is the integration of both. The most dangerous person is not the one who feels despair, it is the one who has silenced it. Because that silence turns inward. It calcifies, it numbs the spirit, it leaves the eyes open, but the soul asleep. Kierkegaard wrote that the greatest despair is to be unaware of despair, to mistake a performance for a life. But now, you are aware, the mask has slipped, the shadow has spoken. The only question left, not to ask, but to live, is this: will you listen? We are taught that if we do everything right, we will be safe. If we study, achieve, smile at the right moments, build the right image, then the chaos will leave us alone. But no amount of control keeps the soul silent. We are raised to believe success is a ladder, climb it, and you'll be above the mass, above the doubts, above the pain. But what no one tells you is this: sometimes the higher you climb, the further you get from yourself. Despair often visits not those who have failed, but those who have succeeded. It comes in the quiet moments, after the deal is signed, after the house is bought, after the applause fades, and then the stillness arrives, and with it, the question, why does it still hurt? The truth is, success can become a prison, a beautiful one. Polished floors, high ceilings, glass walls that shimmer, but it is a cage all the same. And those who have built their identity on external control, on always knowing, managing, outperforming, suffer the most when despair enters. Because despair cannot be managed, it cannot be tricked. It sees through every strategy. It burns through every defense. There is a woman, her name doesn't matter, who did everything right. A model of strength, smart, respected, married, a leader. She was admired for her poise, her reliability, her calm. But inside she hadn't felt alive in years. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't fall apart. She just went numb. And one evening, while washing dishes, her hands started shaking. Not from pain, from truth. It was as if her body could no longer hold the performance. This is what happens when control becomes your god. It demands sacrifice. First, your spontaneity, then, your intuition, then, your softness, and finally, your soul. Despair enters when the cost becomes too great. Because no matter how strong the structure you build, if it rests on the fear of being seen, it will collapse. We cling to routines, to calendars, to tasks. We fill our days to the brim. But underneath all of it, the deeper hunger remains, to be real, to be whole, to be known, not for our image, but for our essence. And this is where despair does its most painful work. It tears away the scaffolding. It shows you that the thing you called security was just silence. That the thing you called success was just survival in disguise. When the illusion shatters, it hurts. It is supposed to, because only in that rawness can something true begin. This is not a call to throw away your life. It is a call to enter it. For the first time, to recognize that control is a mask, and masks are heavy. Let it fall, let the grief come, let the walls shake, because beneath the structure you built you are still there, waiting, watching, hoping to be found, and despair, ruthless as it feels, is your compass. Not to what is easy, but to what is real. Not all despair is the same. Kierkegaard, with a clarity few could match, described despair as a spectrum. Not just a condition of suffering, but a map of the soul's resistance. A path through layers of illusion towards something deeper. He spoke of 3 ways the self hides from itself. 3 faces of despair, each one more subtle, more painful, and more honest. The first is the aesthetic life. It is the realm of distraction, pleasure, diversion, entertainment. The self here is not truly engaged, only entertained. It avoids pain not by solving it, but by drowning it. This is the person who fills every moment, noise, screens, parties, shopping, romance, work, travel, hobbies, all woven into a net of avoidance. Despair here is not obvious. It comes disguised as boredom, as restlessness, as a hunger that nothing seems to satisfy. This despair whispers, something is missing, but the moment you start to ask what, the noise gets louder. The distractions multiply, because the aesthetic self lives in fear of silence. In silence, the mask starts to slip, and so it moves faster, consumes more, achieves, performs, but behind the curtain, despair grows. Quiet, constant, eventually, the cracks show, the pleasures stop working, the laughter feels hollow, the achievements bring no joy. The soul begins to ache for more, not more stuff, but more meaning. And that is when the second stage begins, the ethical life. Here, the person turns inward, begins to ask real questions. Seek structure, duty, integrity. This is the realm of principles, morality, hard choices, sacrifice. It asks the life of the responsible one, the helper, the parent, the builder. This person may be admired, reliable, solid, and yet, inside, a different despair begins. This despair says, I've done everything right, why do I still feel so far away from myself? The self has moved beyond distraction, but now it is crushed under obligation. It wears the weight of the world. It mistakes selflessness for truth. It sacrifices joy in the name of doing what is right. But the real trap of the ethical life is pride, pride in being the strong one, the one who never breaks, the one who doesn't ask for help. And slowly, silently, a deeper despair creeps in, the despair of forgetting that your soul is not a machine. The ethical self clings to rules, but what it needs is freedom. And when that yearning becomes too great to ignore, the person begins to crack open, not from failure, but from honesty. This is where the third stage begins. The authentic life. Here, the self drops all pretenses. No more performing, no more hiding behind virtue, no more playing roles. This is not a comfortable place. It is wild, unstable, sacred. This is the point where a person may lose everything they thought they needed, and yet, feel more alive than ever before. The authentic life begins when the person finally admits, I am not who I pretended to be. I am not the image others worship. I am not what the world told me to become. I am what remains when everything false has been burned away. In this state, despair still exists, but it changes shape. It no longer whispers of emptiness. It no longer screams for distraction. Instead, it becomes a companion, a reminder, a signpost. It tells you when you ray drifting. It calls you back to truth. The authentic self knows pain, but it also knows peace, because it no longer fears itself. This journey, from aesthetic to ethical to authentic, is not linear. It loops, it repeats, you may fall back, you may forget, but each return is quicker, each awakening more complete, and eventually, despair no longer rules you. It serves you, it reminds you that your soul is alive. And that is the paradox Kierkegaard left us. Despair is not the opposite of life. It is the condition for becoming fully alive. There is a truth that most people avoid their entire lives. Freedom is terrifying. Not the freedom to choose a vacation, not the freedom to vote, to shop, to speak, but the deeper freedom, the freedom to become yourself. Because real freedom means you are no longer able to blame the world, no longer able to point at parents, partners, politics, or fate. It means stepping out of the story you were handed and writing your own. That kind of freedom doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like standing on the edge of a cliff, wind in your face, no safety net beneath. And that is why most people don't choose it. They choose comfort, structure, familiar roles. They become what is expected. They say the right words, wear the right clothes, smile when they were supposed to, and quietly, inside, they rot. Not from evil, from fear, because being yourself, fully, deeply, without apology, requires everything. It requires that you break agreements with your past, that you let people down, that you disappoint the image the world had of you. It requires that you face the terrifying truth. You are alone in the creation of your meaning. And here is where despair enters again, not as punishment, but as invitation. It whispers, there is no map anymore, only you, and the fear is real. Because when the crowd is gone, and the voices fade, and you can no longer pretend, what is left? Silence, possibility, responsibility. Most people say they want to be free, but what they mean is they want to be safe while appearing free. They want to be praised for originality while still being loved for conformity. But freedom doesn't work that way. It is raw, demanding, sacred. It will cost you your old life, and it will give you something else in return, your voice. That voice doesn't come from your mind. It rises from the deep, from the part of you that existed before you were taught who to be. That voice is not always kind, but it is honest, and honesty, over time, becomes liberation. This is why people fear their own soul, not because it is dark, but because it is powerful, and that power, once touched, changes everything. There is a man, quiet, ordinary, who lived his whole life pleasing others. He never raised his voice, he never rebelled, he did what was expected. He was loved but never known. And one day, he woke up and realized, he had never spoken his own truth. He wept, not for the life he lost, but for the voice he never used. That moment broke him, and then, it made him whole. This is the fire despair brings. It doesn't burn you out of cruelty, it burns everything false, so that what remains is real. Kierkegaard knew this. He knew that the true self isn't found in peace. It is forged in the storm, not by clinging, but by surrendering. And what do you surrender? Your illusions, your need to be loved by everyone, your addiction to being right, your fear of being alone. You surrender, not to give up, but to rise. Because only when you drop the performance does your real life begin. And only in the presence of despair does that surrender become possible. Freedom isn't easy, but it is the only path worth walking. And despair, cruel, sharp, sacred despair, is the one who walks beside you until you are strong enough to walk alone. Every great transformation begins with a fall, not a stumble, not a misstep, a fall. Something breaks, something ends, something collapses that you thought would last forever. And in that moment, when the structure cracks, when the mask disintegrates, when the roles you played turn to ash, you are left with nothing but yourself. This is the place most people dread, the place they spend their lives trying to avoid. But in reality it is sacred ground, because the fall is not the failure. It is the beginning of truth. The ego sees collapse as disaster, but the soul sees it as opportunity. In mythology, the hero never begins with triumph. The journey always starts with descent, into the underworld, into chaos, into death. That is where the transformation happens. That is where the self is stripped down to its essence. This archetype is older than language. The phoenix must burn before it flies. The seed must die before it becomes a tree. The self must shatter before it can be whole. There is a man, his name doesn't matter, who lost everything. His company, his family, his identity. One by one, each layer of his life was peeled away, and when it was all gone he expected to die, but he didn't die. He sat, he breathed, he wept, he screamed, and then, something strange happened. He laughed, not out of joy, out of recognition. For the first time, he realized, I am still here. Not as a father, not as a businessman, not as a husband, just as himself. And in that moment, he was more alive than he had ever been. This is what destruction reveals, that who you are is not what you lost. You are what remains, and despair is the key. It doesn't knock politely. It tears the door from its hinges, it throws you to the ground. But it does not do this to punish you, it does this because nothing less would wake you up. In destruction, you find clarity, not the clarity of answers, the clarity of essence, the clarity that comes from no longer needing to pretend. This is the paradox of awakening. It feels like death, but it births life. Your career may collapse, your relationship may end, your image may be shattered, but the self beneath all of it, the raw, breathless, untamed self, is still there, waiting to be seen, waiting to rise, and what rises from destruction is not the old self, patched together. It is something new, something honest, something unshakable. Kierkegaard didn't romanticize despair, he didn't call it beautiful, he called it necessary, because despair is the fire that burns the false. It doesn't leave you clean, it leaves you real, and that reality, raw, imperfect, unapologetic, is where freedom lives. So if you have fallen, stay there. Don't rush to rebuild. Don't scramble for safety. Listen, breathe, burn, because on the other side of destruction is your becoming. There is a silence that comes after the fall. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of stripping away. The noise is gone, the audience is gone, the mirrors are shattered, and suddenly, there is no one left to perform for. Only you, and in that space, something rises, something most people mistake for punishment. Loneliness, but loneliness and solitude are not the same. Loneliness is the ache of being without others. Solitude is the discovery of being with yourself. Most people have never met themselves. Not truly. Their days are spent in reaction, they respond to schedules, to needs, to screens, they are always connected, and yet, never present. Despair interrupts that cycle, it doesn't ask for permission. It cuts the cord, and what remains is stillness. At first, it hurts, because in that stillness, you feel everything you've been avoiding. The regrets, the grief, the forgotten dreams, the raw ache of having abandoned yourself for so long. But if you stay, if you don't run, something shifts. The silence starts to speak, and what it says is not loud, not grand, it is small, gentle, unmistakably true. I am still here. That voice, soft and constant, is the sound of your soul. It was never gone, only drowned, and now, in solitude, it begins to rise. There is a woman, no one famous, who once lived for others. Her identity was woven from family, community, obligation. She was never alone, she was always needed. But one day, it changed. Her children left, her relationship ended, her calendar cleared, and she panicked. The silence felt like death. She sat in her apartment and cried, not from sadness, from unfamiliarity. She had no idea who she was without someone else to serve. But over time, the tears stopped, and the questions came. What do I love? What do I believe? What do I want to create? Not for praise, but for joy. She started to walk, to cook, to write, to listen, and what emerged wasn't a new person, it was the real one. This is the power of solitude. It strips away the noise, so that the soul can breathe, but we resist it. Because silence is scary, it contains no distraction, no flattery, no applause. It contains only truth, and the truth is this: you are enough, even when no one sees you. You are real, even when no one needs you. You are sacred, even when no one loves you the way you want to be loved. Despair brings you here, not to punish you, but to return you to the only relationship that lasts a lifetime, the one with yourself. Loneliness is the fear of being forgotten, solitude is the discovery that you are unforgettable, to yourself. Kierkegaard wrote that despair is the sickness of not being oneself, and solitude, real, raw solitude, is the medicine. It doesn't come with answers. It doesn't fix everything, but it gives you this, presence, clarity, peace, and from that peace, the next chapter begins, not louder, not brighter, but truer. You've fallen, you've burned, you've set in the silence, and something is different now, not louder, not easier, not suddenly joyful, but real. This is what lives on the other side of despair, not the old self, triumphant and polished, not a version of you that others will clap for, but the quiet, unwavering presence of someone who has faced the void and did not run. Despair, at its root, is the cry of a soul begging to be known. And when you stop fleeing, when you stand still and listen, it transforms. It becomes not your enemy, but your companion. You start to see the world differently, not through the eyes of image or comparison, but through the eyes of essence. You no longer ask, what should I do to be worthy? Instead, you live from the knowing that you already are. This is the rebirth Kierkegaard hinted at, not a return to comfort, but a passage into truth. Despair does not erase your story, it reveals which parts were never truly yours. And what rises from that is not a performance, it is a life. You will still feel pain, you will still have doubts, but they no longer define you, because something else has awakened, self-trust, not the kind built on success, not the kind based on others' praise, the kind that says, I have been to the edge and I am still here. There is a strength in that, a sacred resilience, not loud, not proud, but unshakable. You begin to walk differently, speak differently, love differently. You no longer beg to be chosen, you choose yourself. You no longer seek to impress, you seek to express. You no longer chase meaning, you carry it, and when despair visits again, because it will, you do not fear it. You meet it like an old friend, you sit with it, you listen, and you ask, not why me, but what are you here to show me this time? This is what it means to be awake, not to escape the darkness, but to walk through it with open eyes, not to be fearless, but to fear less, not to always rise, but to rise differently. The world will still try to sell you comfort, image, performance, the next mask, the next role, the next illusion. But now you know too much, you've seen what is behind the curtain. And once you've touched that raw honesty, that sacred stillness, you cannot go back. You carry the fire with you, the fire of despair that once burned you to ash, and made space for your real life to begin. And maybe that is the whole point, not to avoid despair, but to let it teach you what no one else could, that your worth was never in what you built, never in how you were seen, never in who stayed, or left, or praised, or rejected you. Your worth is in your being, your presence, your breath, and the fact that you are still here, not in spite of despair, but because of it, is proof enough. So take that first step, not away from despair, but through it, and watch what rises.